As the days went by, I began to observe subtle shifts in Michael's behavior. Ever since my adopted son came back from university, there was something about him that I couldn't quite identify. A depth, a new awareness in his eyes that seemed more thoughtful, almost searching. It wasn't uncommon for family dynamics to change as children matured, but this felt different, more noticeable. The first time I realized it was when I caught him watching me. I was in the kitchen, focused on a simple task, chopping vegetables, attending to the stove, and absorbing the usual rhythm of everyday life. I felt his presence before I even saw him. Looking up, I found him standing in the doorway, staring at me, not with his usual warmth, but with an intensity that made me feel uneasy and curious at the same time. Is everything okay? I asked, trying to brush off the strange feeling of self-awareness as I met his gaze. He blinked as if snapping out of a daze, and then smiled, the familiar curve of his lips returning. Yeah, just home, he replied. Things feel different after being away at school. We went through the rest of the day without incident, but the feeling of something unspoken between us lingered. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind wandered to him, his words, the thoughtful glances, and I wondered if there was more to it or if I was simply imagining things. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice it more in the small moments. The way he'd sit across from me at dinner, his eyes occasionally drifting over my face, lingering a bit longer than usual. Or how he would find reasons to be near me. His demeanor had changed, now more attentive than before. I questioned myself over and over, wondering if I was reading too much into it. One evening, we decided to watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in a long time. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV, and we were laughing at a funny scene when his hand brushed mine. It was such a simple touch, one that could have easily gone unnoticed. But the warmth of his skin sent a small electric shock through me, making me flinch. Sorry, he muttered, pulling his hand away, and I felt an unexpected pang of loss. He seemed to notice my reaction, his gaze softening. You seem different, he said, almost unsure. I quickly looked down, trying to hide the redness in my face. I think it's you who's changed, I laughed, attempting to diffuse the tension. All grown up now. But he just kept watching me, his expression serious, searching maybe. Or maybe I'm just seeing things more clearly. His words hung in the air, unsettling and magnetic, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I felt a shift in the boundary between us, a fragile line that now seemed dangerously thin. I cleared my throat abruptly and stood up, trying to brush off the moment. I think I'll go get ready for bed. Big day tomorrow. Michael's eyes followed me as I walked down the hall, and I didn't need to look back to know he was still watching me. The next morning, I woke up feeling more uneasy than ever. It was as though that moment had opened something I wasn't ready to confront, something I hadn't allowed myself to think about. At breakfast, the atmosphere was tense. Michael sat across from me, unusually quiet, his gaze unwavering and unreadable. I focused on my coffee, my pulse quickening every time I felt his eyes on me. Finally, he spoke, breaking the silence. Maybe we could spend the day together, just us. There was something in his tone, soft yet resolute, that made my heart race. It had been so long since we'd had a day like that, just the two of us, and part of me longed to regain that closeness, to remind myself of the role I was supposed to play. Sure, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding, and just like old times. As we walked through the local park, I was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia, remembering the days when he was just a boy. Yet now, there was an undeniable maturity about him, a quiet strength that left me unsettled. We talked about his classes, his goals, and his life away from home. I wanted to absorb every detail, to remember these moments before he would leave again. We stopped in a clearing by the lake, which glittered in the fading afternoon light, and a quiet intimacy settled between us. I've missed this, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Being here with you. I've missed it too, I replied softly, feeling the weight of those words. He turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't seen before. You know, Mom, you're more to me than just family. You're everything. His words struck me hard, his face now so close I could feel the heat of his skin. I felt that same electric tension between us, the same pull that had always been there. I inhaled deeply, torn between my instincts and the flood of emotions I didn't want to confront. Michael, I whispered, but he placed a hand gently on my arm, halting me. Don't, he said softly, his gaze earnest. I needed you to know, to understand. I felt my defenses weaken, my heart pounding in my chest as his words settled into me. In the days that followed, as we prepared for my husband's return, the tension between Michael and me grew thicker. Neither of us dared to speak of it directly. I occupied myself with household chores, cleaning more than necessary, rearranging old shelves, anything to distract from the heaviness in the air. When my husband texted me to confirm his arrival, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I missed him, missed the normality his presence brought, yet I couldn't stop wondering how things would change once he was home, especially with Michael. That evening, I made his favorite dinner, though it felt more like a routine than anything else. The house was quiet, save for the familiar scent of roasting meat and garlic. Michael had gone out saying he had plans with a friend, and I was left alone, awaiting my husband's return. When the door finally opened, my husband walked in, suitcase in hand, his usual smile in place. He looked tired from the journey, but his eyes were warm as they found me. "Home at last," he said, pulling me into a tight hug and breathing in deeply. "You have no idea how much I missed you." I smiled, sinking into his embrace, hoping it would ease some of the tension I'd been feeling all week. "I missed you too," I murmured, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. He kissed me, the touch as familiar as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. I felt Michael's presence lingering in the back of my mind, his absence making the reunion with my husband feel incomplete. We sat down to dinner, my husband talking animatedly about his trip, his meetings, and clients. I laughed in all the right places, asked the right questions, and did my best to stay present. But it was impossible to ignore the tension I felt every time I wondered when Michael would walk through the door, possibly interrupting this quiet moment with his father. It was nearing midnight when I finally heard Michael come home. I had been about to go to bed when something made me pause. Standing at the top of the stairs, I listened to his footsteps as he entered. He lingered by the doorway, and I could sense his hesitation, mirroring my own reluctance. When he turned to head toward his room, his eyes flicked up and met mine across the dark hallway. His face softened, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. In that silent exchange, I felt everything: the connection we shared, the unspoken tension, the confusion between us. In that moment, I knew he felt it too. The next morning, everything felt off. My husband went through his routine, unaware of the undercurrent of tension between Michael and me. At breakfast, Michael was quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on his plate, lost in thoughts I was afraid to ask about. Finally, my husband broke the silence. "You two are awfully quiet today. I thought you'd catch up while I was away." Michael's gaze flickered toward mine before he managed a small smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess. Preparing for exams." My husband nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. I could feel the weight of Michael's silence pressing down on me, warning me of something I wasn't ready to face. A few days later, as I folded laundry, my husband came into the room, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but serious. I paused, folding a shirt with more care than necessary, forcing a smile. "Of course, just adjusting with Michael back in the house and you being away." He tilted his head, studying me with a look that said he knew something was off. "He seems different lately. Did something happen while I was gone?" My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Different how?" He shrugged, his brow furrowing slightly. "I don't know, more reserved. He's usually so open with us." I smiled, trying to reassure him. "He's just growing up. Boys go through these phases." He seemed to accept that, nodding slowly, though I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. We left it at that, but as he turned to leave, he paused. "I know you two have always been close. Maybe he just needs to reconnect with you. You've always been the one to bring him back around." I smiled at the suggestion, but the weight of his words lingered long after he left the room. He had no idea how much closer Michael and I had become, or the boundaries that now felt so blurred. That night, my husband was already in bed when I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. My heart leapt in my chest, and I braced myself. I knew who it was. When I opened the door, there he was, Michael, his face a mixture of hesitation and something deeper. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quiet. I glanced over my shoulder at my husband, fast asleep. "Let's go downstairs," I whispered, stepping out of the room and following Michael to the dimly lit living room. He sat on the couch, and I sat beside him. The silence between us felt thick, heavy with words we couldn't yet speak. For a long time, neither of us said anything. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the conflict he couldn't quite express. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this. How to act like everything is normal when it doesn't feel that way." I felt a tightness in my throat, wanting to reassure him that things could return to normal, but deep down, I knew we had crossed a line. "Michael, this is hard for me too," I murmured. "But we have to be careful for everyone's sake." He nodded, though the hurt in his eyes was undeniable. "I know, but I don't know how to stop feeling this way." And I don't think you do either. His words sent a tremor through me, his gaze grounding me to the spot. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and I felt the warmth of his touch, comforting yet dangerous. My heart raced, torn between the comfort of his hand in mine and the reality of the boundaries we could never cross. Michael, I whispered, my voice trembling, we can't. It's too risky. We both have to be stronger than this. He nodded slowly, but his eyes never left mine. I just need you to know that I'll always feel this way, even if nothing changes between us. The honesty in his words sent a sharp ache through my chest. The vulnerability he had shown made me want to hold him, to let him know I felt the same. But I also knew that we could never truly be together, that the love we shared would always be something hidden, something we could never act on. I reached up, letting my fingers brush against his face, a silent gesture that conveyed everything we couldn't say. You'll always be a part of me, Michael, I whispered, my voice breaking with each word. But we can't keep doing this. For your sake, for mine, we have to let go. He tightened his arms around me and I held him close, letting our shared emotions settle into a quiet acceptance. We both knew this was as far as we could go. This love, this connection would remain hidden, beautiful, yet impossible. After a long, silent moment, he released me, his hand lingering as if he didn't want to let go. I'll never forget this, he whispered, his voice filled with tenderness. I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak, and as he stepped away, I knew that though we could never be together, this night, this love, would live on between us, forever a bittersweet memory.